Nolan tapped his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel as he pulled into the driveway. The house loomed before him, a familiar sight that now felt oddly foreign. He killed the engine and sat there staring at the front door. Another late night. He muttered, "I can't believe my car is parked here." On another work emergency, he probably went inside, the weight of suspicion heavy on his shoulders. The house was quiet and safe, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound. Nolan made his way upstairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He paused at his children's rooms and peered inside. Ethan is 18 and Lily is 6. Old Lily was fast asleep, unaware of the storm brewing in Nolan's mind. He looked at their faces, noting features that had always seemed oddly unfamiliar. Shaking off these unsettling thoughts, he continued to the master bedroom. Sienna was curled up on her side of the bed, her back to the door. Nolan changed quietly, slipping under the covers without a word. As he lay there staring at the ceiling, Sienna's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced over and caught a glimpse of the screen before it went dark. A text from Donovan flashed briefly. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." Sleep eluded him that night, as doubts and suspicions swirled in his mind like a tempest. The next morning, Nolan sat at the breakfast table watching Sienna rush around the kitchen. She looked impeccable, as always, her designer outfit perfectly pressed, and not a hair out of place. Breakfast table, watching Sienna rush around the kitchen. She looked great, as always, in her designer outfit, perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. "Another work trip?" Nolan asked, his tone carefully neutral. Sienna barely glanced his way as she poured coffee into a travel mug. "Yeah, big meeting in Chicago. I'll be back Friday." "That's the third trip this month," Nolan observed. Stirring his cereal, he noticed Sen was already at the table. She flashed him a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she leaned down to kiss the kids goodbye. Nolan couldn't help but notice how different they looked from him. Ethan's skin was a shade darker, and Lily's features seemed to echo someone else's genetics. "He'd call her tonight," Sienna said, before heading out the moment the door closed behind her. Nolan's facade crumbled. He buried his face in his hands, feeling the weight of his suspicions crushing him. Later that day, Nolan found himself in a pharmacy, staring at a row of DNA testing kits. His hand trembled as he reached for one. He felt both monumental and terrifying at home. He followed the instructions carefully, swabbing the inside of his cheek. He did the same for Ethan and Lily, telling them it was a fun science experiment as he sealed the samples and prepared to mail them. He felt a mix of dread and determination in his gut as weeks passed, each day an agonizing wait. Sienna's work trips continued, and her late-night phone calls became more frequent. Nolan watched her, noting every secretive smile and every hushed conversation. Finally, the email arrived. Nolan's heart pounded as he opened the attachment and scanned the results. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as he read the words that would change everything. Probability of paternity, African ancestry detected in child samples, not present in father's DNA. Nolan stared at the screen, his vision blurring. The truth he had feared was now confirmed. His children, the ones he had loved and raised, weren't his. At the screen, his vision blurring, the truth he'd feared was now confirmed felt like a physical blow. His children, the ones he'd loved and raised, weren't his and Sienna's. As the initial shock wore off, anger began to simmer. Nolan's mind raced, connecting dots he'd previously ignored. Donovan, Sienna's boss, the charming African-American businessman who always seemed to be around the lingering looks, the inside jokes, the unnecessary business dinners. Nolan's phone buzzed with a text from his sister Amanda. "Hey, want to grab lunch? You've seemed down lately." He stared at the message, a new suspicion forming with trembling fingers. Nolan called Amanda. "Hey, did you get my text?" Amanda's cheerful voice was a stark contrast to Nolan's frayed nerves. "I need you to be honest with me. Did you know about Sienna and Donovan?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Nolan, how did you find out?" Amanda's voice was small and guilty. "So you didn't know how long I thought it was just a fling at first. We didn't want to hurt you, Nolan." "Rose, who else knows?" Amanda's hesitation spoke volumes. Mom and Jake. Nolan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His own mother and his best friend had known about his wife's infidelity and kept it from him. "How could you?" "You've all been lying to me for years." "Nolan, please, we were trying to protect you." I know. But I'm trying to live a lie, and I'm trying to raise another man's children. I'm sorry, but I don't want to hear it. Don't call me again. Aside from the betrayal, which left him feeling hollow and alone, that evening when Sienna returned from her trip, Nolan was waiting for her in the darkened living room, clutching the DNA results. Sienna was startled when she saw him. "Jesus, you scared me," she said, flicking on the lights. "What are you doing sitting in the dark?" Nolan looked up. His eyes were hard. "We need to talk," he said. "Sienna, what's wrong? You look upset." "I am," she replied. "I'm upset." Nolan laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. He stood and crossed the room to stand before her. He didn't say anything. He handed her the DNA results. Sienna's face panned as she scanned the document. "Nolan, I can explain," she said. "I can explain." Nolan's voice was low and dangerous. He demanded that she explain how she'd been his boss for 15 years, how their marriage was a lie, and how the children she'd raised weren't even his. Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Nolan," she said. "It's not what you think. It's not what I think." Nolan exploded. "The DNA doesn't lie. Sienna, Ethan, and Lily are my children. Donovan's, aren't they?" Sienna's silence was all the confirmation he needed. "How could you do this to me?" Nolan demanded, his voice raw with pain and fury. 15 years, Sienna. 15 years of lies and betrayal." "I'm sorry," Sienna sobbed, reaching for him. "I never meant for this to happen. I love you, Nolan. It was a mistake." Nolan recoiled from her touch. "A mistake. 15 years. Sienna, an affair isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A choice you made every single day to lie to me and betray me. Please, Sen. We can work this out. Think of the children. The children." Nolan's laugh was hollow. "They're not my children. Remember, you made sure of that." Sienna collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please, Nolan, give me another chance. I'll end things with Donovan. I swear we can start over." "There is no starting over." Nolan cut her off. His voice was cold. "You destroyed everything we had. There's nothing left to salvage." He turned away from her, his mind made up. He wanted a divorce from Sienna. "It's over. Please, Sienna," he thought, scrambling to his feet and grabbing her arm. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I promise. I'll do anything." But Nolan shook her off. His eyes were hard. "There was nothing. Fixing our marriage was a lost cause from the moment you decided to betray me. I just didn't know it until now." He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I'll be staying at a hotel. Have your lawyer contact mine and Sienna." He turned, fixing her with a cold stare. "Don't ever. I don't think I can forgive you for this. Some betrayals are just unforgivable." With that, he walked out, leaving Sienna sobbing on the floor as he drove away. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him. He felt betrayed by his wife, his sister, his mother, his best friend. Everyone he had trusted had lied to him. Nolan gripped the steering wheel tighter. Anger and determination coursed through him. They thought they could protect Sienna by hiding her affair. They thought he would forgive and forget. They were wrong. He would show them just how wrong they were. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he checked into a hotel, Nolan was already thinking about how to handle things. They wanted to play games if they wanted, but he would be the one to decide how this ended. He would make sure Sienna paid for every lie, every betrayal, and every moment of the past 15 years. This was just the beginning. Nolan sat in his hotel room, his laptop screen casting a ghostly glow on his face. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he methodically transferred funds from joint accounts to new ones that only he could access. The clock on the nightstand showed 3:27 a.m. 15:27, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. He got a notification on his phone. It was another missed call from Sienna. He glanced at it briefly before silencing the device. He thought this was just the beginning. As dawn broke, Nolan headed to his office. He needed to start the process of liquidating their shared properties without raising suspicion. He walked into the building with a fake smile on his face. His assistant, Sarah, told him that his wife had called earlier and said it was urgent. Nolan thanked her and said he'd handle it later in his office. He made a series of calls to realtors and financial advisors, carefully worded each conversation and making calculated decisions. By lunchtime, everything was in motion. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother. Nolan's jaw clenched as he answered. "Ed, honey," his mother's voice was hesitant. "We need to talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about." Nolan cut her off. His voice was cold. "You lied to me for years. You watched me raise another man's children while knowing the... Truthfully, I was just trying to protect you, she pleaded. We all were. We thought you thought wrong. Nolan snapped. Don't call me again, I'm done with all of you. He hung up, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. Taking a deep breath, he focused on his plan. He couldn't let emotions cloud his judgment. Now, weeks passed, and Nolan maintained his facade of normalcy. He went to work, avoided calls from family and friends, and quietly continued his preparations. Sienna's desperate attempts to Nolan's calls went unanswered one evening as he was leaving the office. He ran to Jake, who he thought was his best friend. Jake's face paled at the sight of him. Nolan, Jake, we need to talk. Jake, man, I need to talk to you. While hiding the truth, Jake flinched. It wasn't like that. We were just trying to protect you and me. Nolan laughed bitterly. By letting me raise another man's kids, by watching Sienna make a fool of me, I was trying to protect us both. Nolan, please. Jake reached out, but Nolan stepped back. He'd show them how wrong they were. Nolan found Sienna waiting for him. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hair was disheveled. She jumped up as he entered. Nolan, please, she begged. We need to talk about this, about us, about the children. There is no us. Nolan replied coldly. They love you. You're the only father they've ever known. Stop it. His voice was sharp. Don't you dare use them to manipulate me. I'm not, Sienna insisted. I'm just trying to make you understand what we had. It wasn't all a lie. I do love you, Nolan. Nolan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Love, you don't even know the meaning of the word. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me for 15 years. It was a mistake. Sienna sobbed. I never meant for it to go on so long. Donovan. He manipulated me. He threatened to ruin your career if I ended things. Save your excuses, Nolan. Sienna reached for him, her eyes pleading. Nolan, please give me another chance. We can work through this for the sake of our family. We're not a family, Nolan said flatly. And soon you'll have nothing to do with it either. Sienna's eyes widened. What do you mean? Nolan smiled coldly. You'll see. He turned and walked out, leaving Sienna calling after him. Please, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Nolan was beyond reconciliation and beyond forgiveness. All that mattered now was revenge. Was his plan revenge? The next few months passed in a blur of legal meetings and financial maneuvering. Nolan worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail was perfect. He watched from afar as Sienna's world slowly began to crumble. Donovan, the man she'd betrayed Nolan for, started to distance himself. Nolan had made sure certain rumors reached the right ears, hinting at financial improprieties and ethical breaches. It wasn't long before Donovan was facing an internal investigation. An investigation was underway. Sienna was desperate. She called and texted Nolan more often, and her messages were more urgent. He saved each one, listening to her pleas with a grim satisfaction, letting her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused him. Finally, after months of careful planning, Nolan was ready. He arranged to meet Sienna at their old house, which was now empty and cold. She was already there when he arrived, pacing nervously in the living room. Nolan, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. I've been trying to reach you for months. We need to talk. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to end this. He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase and handed them to her. Sienna's hands shook as she took them. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Divorce papers. Documentation of all our assets, or should I say my assets. Sienna's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. How is this possible? This can't be right. The house and cars are savings. It's all gone. Nolan smiled, his eyes gleaming. Not gone, just no longer yours. Sienna looked up, shock written across her face. Did you really think I'd let you get away with your betrayal? Nolan's voice was cold. While you were busy trying to save our marriage, I was busy making sure you'd lose everything. Tears welled up in Sienna's eyes. Nolan, please, you can't do this. Think of the children, Nolan grumbled. Don't use them against me again. They're not my children. They're just another part of your betrayal. Sienna crumpled to the floor and started crying. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Nolan looked down at her, unmoved. That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices. Sienna, now you get to live with the consequences. He turned to leave, but Sienna scrambled to her feet and grabbed his arm. Wait, what about Donovan? He'll help me. He loves me. Nolan. He laughed in a cold, mirthless way. Donovan, you might want to check the news. Last I heard, he was facing some serious allegations at work. I doubt he'll be in any position to help you." The color drained from Sienna's face. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything." "Anything," Nolan said with a shrug. "Karma's a bitch, isn't it?" He shook off her grip and walked to the door. He paused in the doorway and turned back to look at her one last time. "Goodbye, Sienna. I hope it was worth it." With that, he walked out. As he closed the door on 15 years of lies and betrayal and got into his car, he could hear Sienna's sobs echoing from the house. He felt nothing. No pain, no regret, just a cold satisfaction. He drove away, leaving behind the remnants of his old life. He had a new life waiting for him, far away from here. It was a life where he could start fresh, unburdened by the weight of betrayal and lies. As he hit the highway, he allowed himself a small smile. Sienna Donovan, his family, they all thought they could control him with their lies and false concern, but he'd shown them he could take everything they had, just as they'd taken everything from him. An eye for an eye, a life for a life. The road stretched out before him, endless and full of possibility. Nolan pressed down on the accelerator, leaving the past in his rearview mirror. He was free now, free to build a new life on his own terms. Nolan had learned one thing for sure: he would never let anyone betray him again. He was done with trust and forgiveness. From now on, he would look out for himself and no one else. As the sun set on the horizon, Nolan drove on. His heart was hardened. His resolve was strengthened. The man he used to be was gone, vanished like a mirage. In his place was someone new, someone stronger, someone who would never again be a victim. The vanishing was complete. Nolan was reborn. 5 years had passed since Nolan had walked away from his old life. The sun streamed through the windows of his sleek, modern apartment in a bustling city, far from the memories of his past. Nolan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping his morning coffee. A sense of calm contentment washed over him. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from his assistant at the tech startup he now ran. He had a meeting with investors at 2 p.m. The projections look good. We're on track to close the deal. Nolan smiled. His new life was everything he had worked for: successful, peaceful, and, most importantly, on his own terms. As he prepared for his day, memories of his past life flickered through his mind. The betrayal, the pain, and the anger seemed so distant now. He'd put all that into building something new, something entirely his own. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. He wasn't expecting any visitors, so he opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large envelope. "Yes, that's me," he said, taking the envelope. He closed the door and took a look at the package. There was no return address, which made him feel a bit uneasy. He opened it up and found a stack of newspaper clippings and a handwritten note. Nolan's heart started racing as he recognized the handwriting. The note read, "You won. I hope you're happy." Nolan's hands shook as he started to the headlines and the clippings jumped out at him. Techmobile Donovan Richards indicted for fraud. The prominent businessman faces 20 years in prison. Richards Corporation files for bankruptcy. Nolan sat heavily on his couch, his mind reeling. He had known about Donovan's downfall. He had orchestrated it after all, but seeing the full extent of the destruction he had wrought was jarring. It was a stark reminder of the damage he had caused. He picked up another article, this one from a local paper in his old hometown. It detailed Sienna's fall from grace, how she had lost everything in the divorce, and how she had been forced to move in with her aging parents. He was forced to move in with his aging parents and struggled to find work with his tarnished reputation. Nolan set the clippings aside, his jaw clenched. He didn't regret what he had done. Sienna and Donovan had deserved every bit of it. However, the finality of it all hit him harder than he had expected. His phone buzzed. It was another text from Rachel, the woman he'd been seeing for the past few months. "Dinner tonight. I've got a surprise for you." Nolan smiled, pushing thoughts of his past aside. He had a new life now, a better life. He wasn't going to let ghosts from the past haunt him. Sounds great. By the time evening came around, Nolan had almost forgotten about the package from Sienna. He met Rachel at their favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian place with the best pasta in the city. She greeted him with a warm smile. She smiled and kissed him. "So, what's the surprise?" "No one asked," she replied as they sat down. Rachel's eyes sparkled. "Remember that job I applied for? The one in London?" Nolan nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I got it," Rachel exclaimed. "I want you to come with me." Nolan's mind was racing. A fresh start in London was a chance to build something new, and he truly cared about Rachel. "That's amazing," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm so proud of you." But Rachel asked, sensing his hesitation. Nolan sighed. "No," he said, "but it's a big decision, my company, my life here." Rachel squeezed his hand. "I know, and I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it, okay?" Nolan nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, let's celebrate your success tonight." As they ate and talked, Nolan's mind kept drifting back to the package from Sienna. He'd thought he'd left that part of his life behind. But had he really? The next morning, Nolan woke early. His sleep had been restless and filled with unsettling dreams. He made his way to the kitchen, brewing a strong pot of coffee as he waited for it to percolate. His eyes fell on the envelope from Sienna, still sitting on the coffee table where he'd left it with a die. He picked it up again, rifling through the contents. This time, a small photo slipped out. It was a picture of Ethan and Lily, the children he'd once thought were his own. They were. Ethan and Lily were older now, teenagers. Ethan had Donovan's strong jawline, while Lily's eyes were unmistakably Asian. Despite everything, despite knowing they weren't his, a lump formed in Nolan's throat. He couldn't help but wonder about them. How had the past 5 years treated them? Did they hate him? Nolan was startled out of his reverie when his phone rang. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Nolan," a familiar voice said. It was Amanda, his sister. Nolan's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" Amanda said quickly, "You get this number, Nolan. You need to come home. It's Sienna. Sienna is not my problem anymore." Nolan replied coldly, "Whatever it is, I'm sure she can handle it on her own. She's here." Amanda's voice was urgent at your old house. "She's not well and is threatening to hurt herself. We don't know what to do." Nolan's mind was racing. Part of him wanted to hang up to cut this last tie to his past life, but another part of him, a part he thought he had buried long ago, stirred with concern. "Why are you calling me?" he asked. He asked his voice to call the police if she's threatening self-harm. "We did," Amanda replied, her voice breaking. "But she's asking for you. She says she won't talk to anyone else. Please, Nolan. I know you hate us all, but please." After a long moment, he spoke. "Text me the address. I'll be there in a few hours." He hung up before Amanda could reply. He already regretted his decision, but he knew he had to do this, if only to finally close this chapter of his life for good. The flight back to his hometown was a blur. Nolan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions as the plane touched down, anger, resentment, and a grudging sense of obligation. He steeled himself for what was to come. A rental car was waiting for him at the airport, and he drove through the familiar streets of his old neighborhood. Memories flooded back. The park where he used to take the kids, the ice cream shop where they celebrated the first day of school, the restaurant where he had proposed to Sienna so many years ago. He pulled up to his old house, and Amanda was waiting on the front porch, her face pale. Amanda was really happy to see him. She rushed towards him as he got out of the car. "Nolan, thank God you're here," she said, reaching out to hug him. He walked past her, into the house. The interior was exactly as he remembered it, but it felt empty and lifeless. He found Sienna in the living room, curled up on the couch. She looked small and diminished. Her hair was lank and unkempt, and she was wearing a shabby sweater and worn jeans instead of her designer clothes. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide. "Nolan, you came. I'm here. I needed to see you to apologize for everything, Nolan. I know sorry doesn't cut it, Sienna. I know it doesn't, but I needed to say it. I needed you to know that everything fell apart after you left." "That was the point," Nolan replied, his tone cold. Sienna flinched at his words. "Donovan left me as soon as the scandal hit. He said he couldn't risk being associated with me and the kids," Nolan continued. "The kids hate me. They blame me for breaking up our family," Nolan said, his voice sharp. "Sienna, that was never our family. It was all a lie." "No," Sienna shook her head vehemently. "It wasn't all a lie. I loved you, Nolan. I still love you. What I did was unforgivable, but my love for you and for our family was real." Nolan laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't know the meaning. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me for 15 years. Sienna was sobbing, her body shaking. I know. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you, Nolan. Help me. I have nothing left, no money, no home, no family. I don't know what to do anymore." He felt a moment of pity, but he quickly pushed it away. He didn't know whose fault it was, but he knew Sienna had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. He turned to leave, but Sienna's next words stopped him in his tracks. "The kids ask about you," she said quietly. "They miss you, especially Lily. She still calls." "You know," Nolan's hand froze on the doorknob. He turned slowly, his eyes hard. "Don't you dare use them to manipulate me again," he said. "I'm not Sienna." "I'm telling you the truth," she insisted. "They love you, Nolan. You're the only father they've ever known." "Stop," he said. Nolan grumbled. "They're not my kids. They're just another part of your betrayal." Sienna sobbed. "Please, Nolan, I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back. I just need help. I don't know where else to turn, Nolan." He stood there, torn between two opposing forces. On the one hand, he wanted to walk away and leave Sienna to deal with the mess she had created. On the other hand, he felt a glimmer of pity and residual affection for her. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice laden with regret. "I'm sorry, Sienna, but I can't help you. Not in the way you want, but I can give you this. Jake, it's Nolan. I need a favor. There's a job opening at your firm. It's right entry level, nothing fancy. I need you to interview someone for it." "Yeah, it's at Sienna." He finished the call, and she was shocked and grateful. Then he turned to her. His face was impassive. "This is all you get," he said firmly. "One chance to get back on your feet. What you do with it is up to you. But don't ever contact me again. Don't ever use the kids to get to me again. Is that it, Sienna? Is that the end?" Sienna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Nolan. I don't deserve this." "You don't deserve this, Sienna. I know you don't. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it so I can walk away knowing I'm nothing like you, like any of you." With that, he turned, and he walked out, ignoring Amanda's attempts to talk to him. He got in his car and drove away, not looking back, as he headed to the airport. Nolan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his past, confronted the ghosts that had been haunting him, and come out stronger. He'd shown mercy without forgiveness, and there was no closure without reconciliation. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Have you thought about London?" Nolan smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years. He pulled over and typed out his reply. "Yes, let's do it together." He knew he was closing one chapter of his life and opening another. The past was behind him now, truly and finally. The future, with all its possibilities, lay ahead. He started the car again, pointing it towards the airport and his new life. The man who had entered that house, the man still tied to his past, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone ready to embrace the future without the burden of betrayal weighing him down. Nolan Reeves had vanished once more, but this time it was on his own terms. And this time it was for good.